Welcome, golfers, to the next episode of the Read It, Roll It, Hole It podcast. Today, we've got a really exciting guest on the call, Mark Day. Mark Day is a PGA professional and has been for a fair few years at Mill Green Golf Club, or the Mill Green. He is an England golf national girls coach. He is the lead coach for them since 2015. And he's just a wonderful mind. And I'm really excited to talk to Mark today. So without any further ado, let me please introduce you to Mark Day. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Ollie. Very kind of you. A fair few years was very generous.
A fair few years. Sorry, yeah. I sort of was looking at my notes and then I haven't actually got how many years, but how many years have you been a pro for?
Oh, 1990, I turned pro.
1990. I don't believe you. You don't look old enough.
Why don't you work that out?
I don't believe you. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark.
My pleasure. Looking forward to the chat.
Absolutely. It's going to be exciting. So, Mark, sort of doing my research on you, and I've known you for from seeing you on social media, etc., over the years, but first time we've actually chatted today. Doing my research on you, you've obviously got a real clear passion for developing youngsters. Where does that passion come from?
I've always had an interest and always been curious working with junior golfers under 18s. And I guess I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it comes from, other than juniors are more prone to challenging. They've got a particular way about them and a style about them that challenges me back. Coaching in an adult world, often the coaching is too transactional, in a sense of I'll pay you money, you give me information, and it's a business transaction. Whereas I feel working with the juniors, it's as much a social transaction as it is a financial one. And that's something that I find quite rewarding.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great stuff. You're clearly very sort of passionate about developing yourself as well, like, through lockdown and even, before we press record today, we were just chatting through today's structure, and you're like, I'm writing that down because I want to sort of, to invest in myself. You've been a pro, 32 years, you just said. That is quite a long time. I don't mean that. I'm not calling you old here. I'm just saying it's a long time. What brings you back for more to keep wanting to develop yourself after 32 years?
Well, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, right? So the more curious you get, and that's sometimes a hard thing to take. So you're learning, you're developing, you're taking on new information, you're having new experiences, and then you're realizing there's just something else around the corner. And I guess as far as my role is concerned and how I see myself as a coach, I think the world of golf is becoming ever more specialist. So we're getting specialist in different areas of the game, and how I see my role and at the moment where I see myself going is if I'm going to be a specialist in anything, it'll be generalism. I'll be a specialist generalist, where I need to know enough about everything to be able to challenge players or challenge other coaches that might be part of a journey, in order to, provide the very best experience for the golfer themselves. So, and the other thing for me is, like, the ultimate coaching question is that I'm always trying to answer is what works for who, in what context, and why. And that's something that was shared with me probably about 6-7 years ago. And ever since I heard that question, that's something that just rings in my head constantly. And I believe that everybody is an expert in their own experience. So I'm not an expert. I can't be an expert in their experience. They are the expert in their experience. And part of my job is to try and understand what their experience is and support them on their journey, wherever that may take them.
Superb. I really like that, and I think it's important for your students to see that you're keen to develop and wanting to sort of learn more. And I love that phrase of the more you learn, the more you realize you know nothing. I certainly feel like that in my world, in the putting world, for sure. But it's nice, I think if your players see you as have a growth mindset and you're looking to develop it, it rubs off to them, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And it allows them to explore a little bit more, as opposed to like, I guess the challenge is in golf, we're very good at providing solutions and working with absolutes. And I think that's something that I promote in my coaching and my life, I guess, is that I'm not sure there are absolutes, or they're certainly not absolutes as the world of golf might have you believe. So here's the solution to never three putting again. Here's the solution to holding every 5-foot putt going forward, never making a double bogey or whatever it is. It's like these abs, and that can't be true. And we know that can't be true yet. I guess to a degree we still get drawn into it, and we get drawn into the romance of that maybe. But yeah, being curious. I think I live kind of by 3 rules really. Be curious, practice reflection, and embrace the chaos. And if I do those 3 things, then I think I'll live a fulfilling journey, as it were.
Brilliant. Let's dive a little deeper into those 3 things. What was it? Practice, reflection, and
Yeah, so the first one's be curious. So it's always like asking why. So you might hear what someone said, for example, in a lesson. You hear what someone said and you listen to what they say, and then it's trying to understand, but what does that mean? So I heard the words, but what does that mean? And I think in the truest sense of understanding people, and that's what, again, coming back to that why juniors is like, there's a difference between knowing golf and being an expert in golf, and and also being an expert in coaching, and there's putting those 2 things together. And I've got a real passion for the game, a real passion for the sport. That it's pretty much all I've ever known since the age of 13. And then I've got a passion for people and understanding people and helping, putting a smile on people's faces, making people feel good. And when I can put those 2 things together, the sport and that social element, that becomes really satisfying. So, and if I also believe that, the student is the expert of their own experience, I have to be curious. I have to ask questions. And going back to, the absolute kind of conversation a little bit, it's a case of when people say this is the answer, my instinct is to then go, yeah, but when is that not appropriate? When is that not the answer? Because there will always be an answer to that question. And as much as that can send you in circles, it actually sends you on some fabulous journeys where you actually learn things that you never knew existed. So be curious is the first one. And so that's just asking lots of quality questions. And then practice reflection is a challenging one, because I think a lot of us will do it, but it's doing it in a helpful manner and doing it in a constructive manner that contributes towards, again, wherever you see yourself going, or what you want to do. It's easy to practice reflection and just look at the good stuff that you did. Equally, sometimes it's easy to practice reflection and just look at all the bad stuff that you did, and you can catastrophize a lot of stuff. But actually getting skillful at reflection in a helpful way is something that was introduced to me that I kind of hold dear, really.
Superb. I love that, Mark. And I think very sort of early on here, you're showing myself and the listeners why you're, a quality coach through that, social element. You see that social skills, the way you communicate with your players, as a highly important part of your job. And yeah, that's really, really great to see.
Thanks. It's worth touching on the last one though. The last one was embrace the chaos. And like, if you're going to play a sport like golf, right, it's going to be chaotic. And if you don't embrace that, it's definitely not the sport for you.
100%. And do you know what? It's so interesting, isn't it? Because golfers do try and, I think, perfect golf and try and reduce the chaos. And they'll, why do you think golf's such a chaotic game? And how can we perhaps embrace that if it's a bit difficult?
Yeah, but that's the thing, is like, I read one of the best books I'm reading at the moment actually is a book called The Grasshopper, and it's about games and playing games, and how as humans we tend to want to make things harder than they need to be in order to overcome the challenge. And it's written in a for the purposes of sport and playing games, and it's just really interesting, that idea that, yeah, exactly what you've just said, where we try and oversimplify it or take away the chaos, but we play in an ever-changing environment, yet we try and give fixed solutions to that. That just can't, that just doesn't match up. That just doesn't make sense. We learn the game in a space that reflects nothing like the environment that we play it in. Yet we question why skills don't transfer from the practice ground onto the golf course. Like, well, yeah, of course that makes sense. And they're the kind of things that the world of golf, social media, Instagram pages, and YouTube, whatever the social media of choice is, they fuel that fire. And if we just, do you know what? The game of golf is really hard. It's played in an ever-changing environment. It needs adaptability. You need to be adaptable. You need to be skillful, not technically good. You need to be skillful. And then if we embrace that chaos, we can then start to learn to enjoy the game a little bit more.
That's interesting, enjoying the game more. I think golfers do try and, as you know, perfect it, and then they stop enjoying it, don't they, by trying to be almost like a robot. I think kids do it great, right? When you see an 11-year-old, if you see a couple of 11-year-olds on the chipping green, what are they doing? They're messing about. They're playing high shots, low shots, and it's great to watch. And then golfers get to, I don't know, let's say 15, 16, and perhaps come into your national squad, and they try and be all good and proper and try and do everything perfect. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a shift that happens, is there becomes a sense of, and a transition from, I'm playing the game, I'm getting better at the game, and now I've got to do it properly. And that properly looks a particular way. And that again is perception, and something I'm massively interested in, is like, how do we perceive stuff? How do we perceive information? How do we, what culture are we growing up in? And it does frustrate me. And that's why I working with like the juniors a little bit more. And I say juniors, under 18s, the students in that space and that age are just so much more open to being different, and they're open to making up their own rules and doing their own thing. And they kind of see this golf club as a tool. They've got this golf ball and they can do different stuff with it. And there are, sometimes no rules to abide by. Well, great, crack on. I've learned so much, and a lot of the games that I've come up with are as a result of actually working with juniors who've made their own rules up. They get the essence of what I'm trying. And again, I'll always say, like, in developing skills, I will create games, and there's a purpose to that game. I want to get something out of that game. If I can share the essence of that game, you can change the rules. If I've got that wrong, brilliant. Let me know. You change the rules, so long as it sticks with the essence of what we're trying to achieve. And if you disagree with that, then brilliant. Let's have a conversation about that and see where that takes us. And as a result of that, I've learned loads.
Brilliant. I love that. Would you suggest, a good tip maybe for the listeners would be to go away and go on the chipping green and invent their own game? That would be a good thing to explore their abilities, their skills, to develop their skills.
Yeah, definitely. Create a game and then go and challenge someone to it, and ask them how they would change the rules. And that's how the games evolve. So that would be absolutely brilliant.
Brilliant. That sounds good. And what's one of your, I don't know, favorite skill development games? We're talking chipping, so let's go chipping, or something, a game that someone's come up that's been completely away from the norm of, let's just get up and down, or something like that. What was on the top of your head there, Mark?
So I guess it depends. So like sometimes when I put sessions together, they'll have a theme. So I'll do like a birdie day, for example, where everything we do on that day is geared towards and in the context of making more birdies. And then I might do a bogey day, where actually everything is in the context of developing skills that are related more to bogey avoidance. But if we took both of those things, and one of the games that stands out, if we think about putting as an example, and I like to use the golf course a lot as a practice environment, as a training environment. And so we just recently done a session with the England girls where it was geared around bogey avoidance. And they just had to complete a challenge. And that challenge was to make 3 pars in a row, which they could make in any way they wanted to. There was no rules over how they could make those pars. We did play them off of the back tees. So that way it was promoting the idea that they might miss more greens because the golf course is longer. So I'm changing the environment that they're used to playing in and seeing how they cope with that and how they handle that. But the idea was to promote the that they would miss more greens, which means they're going to need to demonstrate some good short game skills and then some really good holing out skills. So the focus would be more on putts inside kind of 8 feet, from the chip shot. But what they had to do is, in order to start the challenge, they had to check in. So we normally have like a check-in challenge, and that check-in challenge was to make a par from a missed green in regulation. And so when we're looking at missed greens in regulation, what we're now doing is we're starting to develop skills such as scanning around the green, seeing where maybe the best miss is. Then they've got to execute that shot. They've got to collect information they might not be used to collecting, for example, front of bunkers, back of bunkers. They might be noticing where there's more rough versus more fairway. They might be noticing, they know that, getting it inside 20 yards is a premium as far as getting it up and down is concerned. So they might be looking at the space that's 20 yards. So all of a sudden they're scanning the area in a slightly different way. Then they've got to execute that shot. Then they've got to get it up and down. And as a check-in challenge, once they've done that, then they can go and complete their 3 pars. But once they've completed the 3 pars, then they have to check out. And to check out, you have to make a par from a bunker anywhere on the hole. So all of a sudden, they're looking for different information. They're seeing different things on a golf course that is very familiar to them, but they're now looking for new information. And that transitions, and we're starting to use that as a way of developing skills that will then transfer onto tournaments where they're not so familiar with where the bunkers are and shape of fairway, shape of greens. So there's a lot of implicit stuff going on there, but that's quite a nice task. And how you can use the golf course differently as away from just a performance. I need to go out and shoot the lowest score that I can space.
Absolutely love that game, Mark. That's really cool. Using the golf course in a different way, I think, is so important, isn't it? Golfers tend to use the golf course as play golf, and then they practice elsewhere. So practicing on the course and having specific tasks to do like that is a wonderful way of developing skills. So it's good. Aiming at a bunker, not many people do that, right? When they go on the golf course normally, or try and hit it in a bunker.
Absolutely. And that's a real high skill level, right? Because in order to get it in, the bunkers are normally much smaller than the greens. So to be able to put it in that bunker, then actually that requires a high level of skill.
Totally. No, that's good. I like it. So just moving on to sort of what we're sort of touching on the girls squad there, the national squads. If you've got a tournament coming up, the home internationals are coming up in a month's time. I say month's time. I don't know why I'm putting a time frame on it, because you might start preparing before the month's time. But can you talk myself and the listeners through what that preparation phase looks like? When do you start? Is it a month? Is it 3 months? Is it a week? How do you start preparing the players for that, peak performance? And how do you prepare? The second part of the question is, how do you prepare for the actual golf course? So what do you do in practice rounds? Do you go before practice rounds to map the course out? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the planning and preparation really starts now. It started in September. So our coaching season starts in September with the new squad, and then we'll do coaching on a monthly basis through till about March. We'll go away in February for a 5-day camp in Quinta del Lago. And then we kind of have our first tournaments start kicking in April. Some of the girls might play tournaments prior to that in women's events, but the first girls events start kicking in really in April and the Easter holidays. And we in September sit down and at the moment we're kind of working on scheduling, because scheduling for me is like a massive thing as far as when do I want to play my best golf. If we understand and accept that I'm not going to play my best golf every week, and I don't need to play my best golf every week. If I could choose 4 weeks, just like the world of golf has, in the men's game, it has 4 majors. In the women's game, we have 5 majors. It's like, if I could choose when to play my best golf, it would be those weeks. And so what we can then start doing is thinking about, actually, our other tournaments, do they become development opportunities rather than me putting myself under pressure to perform and win? What am I getting out of those events, those development competitive opportunities? And how is that contributing towards me peak performing at the time that I want to peak perform? So some of the girls might have a schedule that says, right, my first major is going to be the German Girls, which is an amazing tournament at St. Leon Rot. So that would be the first one. Then we might have European Team Championships where we want to medal as Team England. Then we might have the Home Internationals where we always want to win the Home Internationals. And then we might have the British Girls where the girls will then go on and compete for themselves and win an amazing tournament. And so we're saying if that's when we want to peak perform, what are we doing now that's contributing towards that? So it can never be. It's never really what you do in that one practice round before the event. Everything that you do now has an impact on what happens then. And so if we're not thinking about that now, then potentially are we wasting time? And so we'll look at that as a macro cycle, and then we chunk that down into like a meso cycle of, right, where do I want my game to be in 6 to 8 weeks time? If I know what good looks like, so sorry, backtracking a little bit, I need to know what good looks like at those tournaments. So for example, German Girls, if I'm not shooting somewhere between 12 and 15 under par, then I'm probably not competing to win that tournament. And so what knowing the golf courses, what are the kind of skills that I need? How far do I need to hit it off the tee? What kind of proximities do I need to look for as far as approach shots are concerned? What does my short game need to look like? What is my putting? What's kind of, they're big greens, they're sloping greens, they're fast greens. So how can I bring some of that? What skills am I missing at the moment that are going to contribute towards me being better at the end of May when I'm playing in that tournament? And we can start putting those plans into like a 6 to 8 week program. And then that 6 to 8 week program then gets condensed down into, right, what am I going to do this week? And that weekly basis becomes massively negotiable because that weekly stuff is happening right now. And right now, I might not feel very well. Right now, I might have exams on. Right now, there's other stuff going on in my life. Right now, it's it's dark in the evening and, I've got less daylight hours. So I can't get to the golf course so much. So what can I do indoors that contributes towards me, because doing something is better than doing nothing. Doing something constructive and proactive is better than doing nothing. So you're then looking at it on a weekly basis, and that becomes, as I say, quite negotiable. And but we need to monitor that, and we need to track that and go, right, okay. And this is kind of links into that practice and reflection part, is about this week that I've done, or this session that I've done, or even this shot that I've hit. You can condense it right down to that moment there. It's like, how does that fit into this session this week? How does that fit into what I've done previously? So the previous 3 or 4 weeks leading up to this moment, does this feel like it's a part of the journey, or does it feel like it's an outlier? And how does that link into what's going to happen over the next 6 to 8 weeks? And so that journey as such is something that we piece together and we support players with and we monitor. So actually, when it comes to the tournament itself, it is just a part of the journey. It's not something that's necessarily, yes, it's really special and we want it to be special. And every time those girls tee it up in that European Team Championships on that first tee and smash it down the middle of the fairway, I get chills down my spine, because I'm not sure that's something I could have done at that age. But it's absolute quality to watch and observe. And yes, so in that sense, it's really special, but actually there's a sense of normalization to it as well, because it's what we've planned for, because it's what we've done. Everything prior to that has been about this moment and preparing for this moment.
That's good.
So,
I like it. You're not putting pressure on them, are you, to perform on that week, because you're doing all the hard work prior?
Yeah. Hopefully that's the build up to it. And then when we get there, as far as the tournament week is concerned, we have practice rounds, and at the bigger events, you're likely to get a couple of practice rounds. And so that first practice round really is about gathering information and having experiences that are going to help you make better decisions during play. So it's like, what information do we want? What experiences do we need to have? We might structure practice rounds in a way, like the first 6 holes, we might do a particular task where we're looking for certain information and we're having certain experiences. And then the next 6 holes, we might do something a bit different to mix that up. We might focus a little bit more on short game, or we might focus a bit more on reading putts. Interesting, the putting one is something that I think we've evolved into. Is I think a lot of players will go and they'll have a practice round and they just generally putt round and get a feel for the greens, as opposed to being constructive and seeing it as, if it is a practice round, it's called a practice round. is it not a practice session? So that could we not be more constructive and productive in that round rather than just putting it round? So am I starting the ball on intended line? It's having that awareness about you. How is my speed control? And how is my green reading? So that after the round of golf, you don't actually have to do a lot on the practice putting green, because you've already done it on the golf course, and you've done it in the context on the field of play that you're going to compete on. So anything that you do post round is then it should be shorter, cleaner, and just should be focused on that one element or a couple of elements that are going to help you perform better the next day. And then the second round, so if we design strategies around that, after the first round, what we then might do is sit down and again, part of working as a team. So the interesting thing is for me is I'm not the one who's played it. So I've not had those experiences. So we have a sit down, we'll always have a team meeting. And one of the questions we'll ask is anyone got any questions about strategies? Anyone not sure about what to do on the fourth, or how about that 17th? What are you thinking there? And then one of the players might go, yeah, I'm not sure whether it's 3-wood or driver. And then a couple of other players will share their experiences. And it's through those shared experiences that you can come up with your own strategy or strategies. And then day 2 practice will then be more about testing those strategies. So we might start looking at performance a little bit more. Might be performance training in a sense of right now, I want you to intentionally go out and maybe hit a target score of greens in regulation or quality greens in regulation, or I want you to be chipping it a bit tighter to the flags. We always use ghost holes, so let's anticipate where those flags are going to be. Can you do more short-sided stuff? So that actually going in with the holes where you might be going in with a wedge or 9-iron, if you were to miss that side, you've got some experience of that shot, as opposed to just hit it the other side of the green and take the par.
Brilliant, Mark. My head is spin. I've got 1,000,001 questions coming your way. Let's start with, you talk about strategy on that first practice round, and you're assessing what's going on, what the course looks like. What exactly are you assessing? Go into more detail for us with that.
So I guess there's things like lines off the tee, yardages off the tee. So again, a lot of players will be drawn into, I hit driver off the tee, or par 3s, I hit 7-iron off the tee. And so they'll record the club as opposed to the yardage. So we know, and we've already talked about the idea that we play in this ever-changing environment. Well, what if the wind's in a completely different direction? What's more useful information to have? What club you hit the previous day, or the yardage that you want to hit it in those conditions? And so par 3s, it might be, let's look at the front of the green. What is it to the front of the green? What is it to the back of the green? What is it to the middle of the green? Do I need to break that down further? Do I need to do that in thirds rather than halves? Do I need to do that in quarters? So it's like breaking the par 3s down, so we've got those helpful numbers that we can use on any given day. We will shot record as well, so we will record it was a 7-iron with that wind to that yardage on that day, and it finished here, because again, that's useful information that we might be able to tap into over the next 3 or 4 rounds, depending on how many rounds the tournament's over. So that's the kind of information that we're gathering. And then on other holes, it's like, what's the line from the tee? Is that carry on? When would that carry not be on? Kind of come up with scenarios that it may be worth taking on that challenge, or that carry or not that carry. Approach shots, are we going in? If we're going in from inside 140 yards, we would want to be looking at getting it inside quality greening regulations. That's a game forged term. And by the way, anything that I say is somebody else's information, probably, or somebody else's intellect. I know nothing. I've only learned from other people. So unfortunately, I can't always credit those people where they've come from. But quality greens is a phrase that we use quite a lot, which is game forged terminology. And a quality green is when you hit the greening regulation inside 20 feet. So if we understand that 80% of our birdies are going to come inside 20 feet, and 50% of those actually come inside at 8 feet, then we need to be looking at getting it inside 20 feet as often as we can, but not recklessly. We want to do that skillfully. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we can tap into is like, well, how many shots do I have inside 140 yards? That's going to give me a chance of setting me up a quality greening regulation if I work on the basis that I'm I'm going to hit 50% of my shots inside 5% of the total yardage. So we've got that as a framework. And then it's a case of understanding, well, when would it not be appropriate to go at that flag? When would it not be appropriate to go for the quality green in regulation, even though I might be 110 yards away from the flag? It might not be appropriate to go for the quality green. It might be more appropriate to go for just hit the green in regulation. If I happen to make birdie, I make birdie. But what I'm not doing is walking off with a 5 on a hole that really is unforgivable to do that on. So approach shots, and then
some big nuggets there, Mark. Sorry to cut over you. Big nuggets for the listeners there with that quality green, 20 for 5%, 50% of them. They're going to give you if you hit it inside, that's where all your birdies, or 80% of your birdies, going to come from. That's what I thought. You'd have a clear strategy, and that's good. I really like that.
Yeah, cool. And it can sound complicated sometimes, because then you go in quality greens 20 feet, then there's 5%, and it is complex. Like the game of golf is complex. That's why we've got to embrace the chaos, right? So if people are going, oh my God, that just sounds like too many numbers, and people do get, and we've spoken a little bit about it already, as far as like they get a bit frightened of stats. It's like stats, stats are everywhere. Stats are everything. It's just what you choose to shine your light on as far as that. The number that you put on the bottom of your scorecard is a statistic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How many shots you got frustrated with is a statistic. So whether you choose to focus on that, or whether you choose to recognize that as a statistic you want to do something about, is entirely up to you. But actually, we can sometimes objectify the game a little bit more. And when you do objectify the game, I find when I sit with players and we're on the putting green and I do the 8-foot thing, and you go, right, what's the average make rate from 8 feet, to an average club golfer, and they're going, well, the best players in the world are probably holding 80% of those. You go, well, no, it's actually 50%. And then that drops down to 35% at 10 foot. You're going, oh my God, really? What, they only make 50% from here? Well, I feel like I should make all of them. I go, I know, and that's part of the problem. That's what...
Managing expectations,
Yeah, exactly. So actually, when you start to take the time, and I do think stats can be kind of, I've probably said a lot there very quickly, but that takes me time to understand, because then I'm thinking, well, actually, a 5% miss on a shot could be a good shot, but if I don't use that strategically well to a particular pin position, then that could leave me in a position that I'm going to be struggling to make bogey from if I get that wrong. And so it's piecing that together and having a better understanding of what that feels and looks like on the golf course, that you can then start to strategize better. But you're strategizing in a more skillful way. I keep using that word because that's kind of a word I'm quite passionate about at the moment. It's about being more skillful with what you do.
That's good. Just on the 5% rule there, Mark, can you just explain to listeners perhaps who haven't heard of this term what exactly that means?
Well, it's not a rule as such, but if a tour player was to hit X amount of shots, 20 shots to a 140-yard target, then the dispersion, 50% of those would be inside 5 feet. Sorry, 50% of those would be inside 5%. So 5% of 140 yards is 7 yards. So 50% of their shots would be inside 7 yards. So now all of a sudden, and again, using a lot, I'm a big Scott Fawcett fan, so I use a lot of decade frameworks and strategies. Is like, from that, I can now almost picture that. And so if I hit that shot pattern and dropped it on that flag, how many of those would miss the green in a position that I wouldn't be able to get up and down from? How many of those would set me up for birdie? How many of those would set me up for par? If there's too much of a risk, I could then shift that. How far would I need to shift that in order to create more birdie chances, at the same time reduce bogey chances? So it's understanding your shot dispersion and understanding that actually every time you stand over a golf ball, multiple futures can occur. There's not just one future. And when I'm talking about multiple futures, what golfers will then tend to do is think, well, there's my best shot, this could happen, or there's my worst shot, that could happen. And then they base their strategies around that, as opposed to, well, actually, if I hit 10 shots and I remove my best and my worst, what's likely to happen? And so by getting good at forecasting multiple futures, reasonable multiple futures, you can actually have a lot more fun playing golf, and you'll score lower as well.
Superb. That's great. Yeah, Scott Fawcett is a friend of the show. We had him on the podcast last year, and I think the decade system is wonderful, isn't it? It's really good.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what the five. But interestingly, when you get into pitching, it stretches out to 10%. So that doesn't mean that they're hitting it further away from 80 yards than they are from 160 yards. They're actually still hitting it closer. So the absolute proximity is closer, but the percentage miss is higher.
And it gets longer on the long game as well, doesn't it? On the driver off the tee.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's
on the putting green.
Yeah.
I think nearer 10% on the putting green for pace. But
yeah, it is. Yeah.
Interesting. Just on stats, you've mentioned you need to know German girls 14 under, what's that, 3-4 rounds, score average of 68. Okay. What is my score average? How, and then you need to get up and down a certain amount of times, you need to have strokes gained putting. What stat system do you use with the squads?
So historically we've used Golf Data Lab.
Yeah.
We've just shifted now to Upgame.
Cool.
But I can't. It's just a brand new shift over. So it's probably. I don't know enough about it yet to actually maybe have a conversation. But come back in 6 months' time or a year's time, and I'll be able to tell you all about Upgame. But we've historically used Golf Data Lab. As far as using stats is concerned, I think it's important to not generalize stats, and I do have a framework that I start with, and then it's about panning that out to really work with what the player wants to work on, what the player needs to work on, and what is their area of interest. But if the goal is to consistently score low, then the only two stats you need is greens and regulation and putts per round. And it's an interesting one, putts per round, because it's something that a lot of coaches that I've spoken about, and even a lot of good players, they say there's no value in, or there's very little value in putts per round, because there's too much variation goes into that statistic. And I would say, well, it's because there's so much variation that goes into that statistic that it becomes a really powerful statistic to monitor. So the assumption is if you hit more greens, you're going to make more putts. And that makes perfect sense. And that absolutely would match up with some of my experiences with players. But if you want to compete at the highest level, then there's no negotiation on that. You have to hit lots of green, and you need to have less putts. So you need to be, if you're not hitting more than 70% of greens and taking less than 30 putts around regularly, then you're not going to compete at the highest level, and you're probably not going to win very often. And so when you're looking at that putts per round statistic, all of a sudden, and this is where kind of obviously putts gained has a value, but putts gained doesn't help you make sense of what your chipping contribution was to your putts. It doesn't help you make sense of what your approach play contribution was to your putts. Because if you're not hitting it close enough, your putts gained could be very high. In fact, the further away you hit it, the easier it might be to get a better putts gained value. If I hit it to between 30 and 40 feet every time, and I two putt that every time, I'm going to walk off with a putts gained value. But I'm not going to score low because I'm not close enough to the hole anytime. And so understanding that actually, like, greens in regulation, 70% or more, putts per round 30 or less, where am I now? How do those two interact with each other? And what strategies and plans do I need to put in place in order to increase or reduce those, depending on which one you're working on?
Really interesting, Mark. I definitely in the other boat where I say to golfers, putts per round is a real poor way to measure putting performance. So but hearing you explain, obviously with the greens in regulation, I think that's interesting. And with 70% hit, 70% of the greens in regulation, and 50% of them are inside 20 foot.
Yeah, if you can get 50%, 50% is a good number. It's not a winning number, but it's a good number to do on a regular basis. So if you can hit 12 and a half greens plus on a regular basis, and you can get more than 50% of those inside 20 feet, you've got a chance. as we know, anything can happen on any day, right? So in golf, and that's why it's important in golf not to be too episodic with your feedback, in like just feeding back on that moment, on that round. It's like, how does that fit into a bigger picture? Is that just an outlier? Is that just something that happened to me, as opposed to something that was a part of my training plan? And I guess when we're talking about this, we're talking about players who maybe have some long-term goals in the game. You know, if I'm a social golfer at the weekend, I might have a part of this that's of an interest, but it's not something that I would necessarily be doing. I wouldn't, you know. It depends on why you're playing the game, I guess, as to how much you would get into the stats and how you use those stats.
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on, the level of the golfer, the dedication, but also the mind. I think, like, if they're a technical person, then they love the stats, but some people, don't. So finding the best way for you, maybe.
Yeah, and the other thing about putts per round is, I think using statistics that you can monitor in the round are a really useful way of helping self-regulation and being able to, like, set yourself little in-round goals, during round goals. You seeing opportunities that you might not have seen before. So if you're outside 30 feet and you start to recognize if I two-putt that's a good thing. You can then monitor, that then kind of helps you reset. You then might demonstrate a certain set of behaviors that then is going to contribute towards that, as opposed to, I have to hold this putt to make up for the double bogey I had on the previous hole, and then I end up ramming that 6 foot past and then missing that one because now I feel under pressure because I've now made, and then I'm compounding mistake after mistake, as opposed to, just seeing it as actually it's a 33 foot putt, and if I two putt this, I'm up on the field, if you like, if we're going to use those numbers and those statistics.
Sure.
The strokes gained, again, there is a value in that. Of course, there's a value in that, but I think it's difficult to monitor. And I always ask the question, against what? Strokes gained against what? Because I don't always think it's a useful thing to be considering yourself against the best players in the world. It would be brilliant if you could do it against yourself. So a personally referenced goal that says, well, actually, my putts per round is trending in this direction from 34 down to 32 putts per round. And that is as a consequence of actually chipping better, not putting better, chipping better. So I'm stood over more putts inside 15 feet. And as a result, standing over more putts, I'm holding more putts. Well, that's going to contribute towards lower scoring.
Yeah, fascinating. You're definitely backing up your opinions for the counting the putts, and that's good. It's interesting. It's interesting stuff for sure. Okay, Mark, let's just finish off with keeping on the putting side. And you did sort of mention this a little bit earlier, but on your website, you've got a video presentation you've done about putting. And one of the first part, or its title was Make Every Putt. But there's a definition of what making a putt and holding a putt is. So I think it's really a really interesting way of seeing it. So could you explain that terminology for the listeners, please?
Yeah, so the idea of making a putt is like you can stand over every putt and make every single putt. And again, it's terminology that we might use in golf where actually that reference holding the putt, but I think it's useful to separate the two. And so on the understanding that you're not going to hold every single putt, therefore, the outcome shouldn't determine the success of the execution or the decision making, then we can then start to look at that in a different way that says, well, if I start the ball on my intended line at my intended speed, and I felt like I got a good read on that green, then, that I made that putt. Now, I'll backtrack a little bit there and say, I don't even need to read it right. I just need to create an intention. And if I've got a really solid intention, so right, there's my start line, and that's the speed I want to start it on, and I'm happy with that, and I execute that, I can then and say, do you know what? I made that putt, but I misread it. I made that putt, but actually, if I had another go, I would use a different speed. But actually, I executed the speed that I intended. So therefore, that for me would be the definition of I made that putt. And what that will start to do, again, if we can practice that form of reflection, then that starts to guide us into where we might want to continue our practice or training. What skills do I need to continue to develop? Because there's a pattern in my misses here. There's a pattern in, why the ball's not going in the hole as often as it should be. And that's because my speed control isn't as good as it needs to be in order to hole more putts or reduce three putting. But actually, I'm executing putts that I want to hit. If I didn't look at that outcome and I just executed, I would have thought that had a chance of going in, or I would have thought that was close. And for me, that's the definition of making a good putt.
I really like that. I think it helps, help golfers commit and focus on what they control, right? So control of controllables. You're in control of making the putt, but you're not in control of holding the putt, perhaps. So that's great. Mark, can you just to finish off, I'm just conscious of your time, and like, it's been a wonderful conversation today, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners have. Where can the listeners find out more about you, and on your website and on social medias to reach out and maybe have some questions for you, or I know you do online lessons as well. Maybe they think that's a bit of me, that I want a bit of that. Share with them, please.
Yes, I guess Instagram, I'm markday_golf, Twitter, markdaygolf, and I have a website, which again is Mark Day Golf. So I guess generally, if you do something related to Mark Day Golf, you'll find me somewhere.
Brilliant. That's how I found you on your website. So that's good. Mark, once again, thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to speak to you. And I know that, it's nice to sort of come off the call and go, I know that the under-18s girls are in good hands with yourself and Nick Sotto, who's a good friend of mine, who's a very good putting coach. So I know, they're in good hands. So it's really good. And thanks again for your time.
No, pleasure. And thanks for inviting me on. And I will just mention on that as well, from coaches and any coaches listening, like creating that network of coaches around you that you can share stories, you can share experiences. I just think is a wonderful place. And I'm absolutely blessed to be able to work with some amazing coaches at England Golf that help me continue to be a better coach as well. So the golfing community now, I think, is so much stronger. And any coaches out there that may feel alone sometimes, is like, jump into one of those networks, because they're an awesome place to be.
Totally. Absolutely. It's very important, isn't it, to share ideas. And I mentioned Nick, we're good mates, and we share a lot of ideas and bounce our heads off each other, and it's great to do so. So brilliant. Thanks a lot for your time, Mark.